Hey there, I am Barb Higgins, and this is 1,000 Tiny Steps. In this podcast, I share my stories of love, loss, triumph, and tragedy as I continue to retrace my steps and ponder what led to the death of my daughter Molly. By doing so, I hope to not only help myself, but to bring purpose and possibility to those who listen. If you are ready to laugh, cry, shake your head in disbelief, then tie, buckle, lace up, or slip on your shoes, and join me as we begin our 1,000 Tiny Steps. Hey everybody, Barb Higgins here, welcoming you to episode 208 of 1,000 Tiny Steps. So in my season of guests, I've talked about 80 million different things. I've had wonderful people talk about chronic illness, talking about job changes, talking about having a pig's kidney, talking about going under gastric bypass surgery to help the dad with the new kidney. A million different things that have touched me because I feel like we all have stories to share. As is typical for me, sometimes my guests come when I simply reach out on my social media and say, hey, would anyone be willing to talk about this? So I have 3 guests lined up for the next 3 episodes that all have remarkably different experiences around sibling loss. When Molly died and I was tasked with writing an obituary, I put at the end, we will all miss Molly, but Gracie will miss her the most. Even though I'm her mother, I firmly believe that Gracie's ache for Molly is completely different than mine because they were together all the time. This will be interesting for me. So Margaret here lives in Concord with me, and I knew of her long before I knew her. She's a well-established author with a knack for very, very interesting historical fiction. You know, we came to know one another when I wrote Motherland. She was a huge help with Virginia and myself putting that story together. And she has a keen intuition for some of the nuances of life. So, Margaret, thank you for coming and being on the show. I really do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Barb. It's good to see you, although I don't usually see you screen to screen like this.
Yes.
And having an early view of the initial version of Motherland and then being able to read the subsequent version and attending your book launch at Gibson's bookstore I felt really much very part of that journey.
Yes.
And hearing Virginia McGregor talk about the work that you and she did and what a powerful, powerful witness it is.
Unbelievable.
So many aspects of your life, but also things about it resonate, I think, with everyone, with me, with others, I'm sure, who've read it and who know your story. And I've learned about Molly through that, and Gracie and Kenny. As you said, I'm an author. I've had 17 novels published, 15 historical and 2 contemporary. And I've been pretty much a writer all my life with imagination that works and building up stories in my mind. And so that really connects to my experience of sibling loss, because probably most people who are sharing with you about their experiences are speaking about a sibling that they knew and that they loved dearly and that was a part of their lives. I'm speaking of a circumstance in which I didn't know the sibling and yet profoundly have felt the loss of that sibling and the mystery of who that person might have been. When I was 5 years old, I learned that I had a baby brother. I didn't know. I knew I had a living baby brother, but I didn't know that I had a dead baby brother. And I was with my great aunt, who was my grandmother's sister. And she was one of those people who was very attentive to the relatives who were in the cemetery. I believe it was probably with milestones like birthdays and death dates and things like that. And I suspect, although I can't say for sure, I was 5 years old, I suspect that she was planning to take flowers to my baby brother's grave on his birthday or on his death date. He was born in June. He died, was killed in August. He lived that long. I had a baby brother? What do you mean? My brother's at home. So the great aunt, said, yes, she used to have a baby brother and going to go put flowers on the grave. And he's buried with my parents, your great-grandparents. And that was pretty much all I was told. Well, being an inquisitive, curious child, my head was just exploding.
Right.
So I go home and it's like, I had a baby brother, Mom, tell me more. And I'm just a little kid. And I could tell even then that it was something that was really, really hard, if not impossible, for her to talk about, because this was something that had happened not that many years before.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure it was my brother's birthday because I said, can we make a birthday cake for him? Because when you're a kid, when you're 5 years old and your sibling has a birthday,
Right.
got to make a cake. We got to work and make a cake. My dad comes home from the office and the house smells like cake. And I go rushing to my dad and I said, we're making a birthday cake for the baby. And he just sort of froze. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was clear that he had needed some recovery time to understand what was going on. There was a little sidebar with my parents. And then, we had the cake. There wasn't really any discussion of what had happened. I was only 5. My brother was a couple of years younger. It was just sort of, we ate the cake and I was satisfied. I put flowers on a grave. I had a birthday cake. I still had a lot of questions. So I was satisfied with the way things went at that moment. But over time, I really obsessed about this baby that I had known but hadn't known what had happened. What happens to a baby that disappears like that?
Yeah.
And that nobody wants to talk about. So that was the beginning of my lifetime up until even earlier this year of curiosity about what happened, how it happened, the impact on my parents. And it's been years of uncovering secrets, of being sensitive and respectful of my parents' grief and their inability to talk about it for so much of my life. But I can tell you what I now know.
Yeah.
When I was very young, just a few years old, my mother had me in the car with her and my 2-month-old baby brother and was driving, making a turn. I think it was a turn into the street that our house was on, the house she still lives in. She was blindsided by a driver. And for a long time, that's all I knew. I was injured. This was before the day of child restraints. My head went into the windshield. I was cut. My baby brother was killed instantly. We were all taken to the hospital. My father, as I later found out, was not even in town. He was in the military and was at summer army camp.
Right.
He was 2 states away. And he gets a phone call and they say, your wife and your 2 children were in an automobile accident. One of the children is dead. We don't know which one. Military police or someone, obviously he couldn't drive, put him in the car and drove him across 2 states home. And he told me later, one of the few times we ever talked about this, he said, throughout the whole drive, I was praying and crying and in complete shock, but I kept thinking, if one of the children is dead, and he hated himself for this thought, he said, I hope it's not Margaret, because I've known her for a few years. She's the one I know. I don't know this baby yet. And that just was horrible for him. I totally understand that.
I totally understand it.
But that was where he was. So we were all in the hospital. Eventually, my mother and I were released, and there was a funeral for the baby. I didn't remember any of this. I was too young to remember any of this, but I do remember my first memory of life, of being alive and being on this earth, is being in a hospital room, not that time, but a couple of years later, because my face required facial reconstructive surgery, a couple of operations, but it had to heal first before they could do
the next phase.
surgeries. Yeah. So my very first memory of life is being in a hospital room, my parents visiting me and saying, good night, and we'll see you tomorrow. And I had the nicest nurse. She was so sweet to me. And I remember them so well. They were called color forms, and they were from Disney things. Like, I had Cinderella and Lady and the Tramp, and they were like these little rubber stickers, and you could stick them onto a scene and play with them.
Things.
They were kind of like paper dolls, but they didn't fly around. They were, yeah. And so I remember those. So my very first memory of being alive was being in the hospital, being prepped for this reconstructive surgery. As I was growing up, sort of 10 years old, 12 years old, yeah, I would think about it, but I could tell this is not a subject that we talk about.
Right.
Not a subject that we talk about. But once I was a little older, maybe in my teens, I think, I had 2 grandmothers who were very, very different. And one of them lived in the city that we lived in, and I spent a lot of time with her. And I one day got up the courage to ask, what happened? Tell me about this. And she's the one who told me, also told me that my dad had been away and the accident happened. And she didn't give a whole lot of detail, but she lived through it. And So I got a little bit more information. I was told myself I was satisfied and I wouldn't go pestering my parents with questions about their part of this great tragedy. And then came the really hard part. Went to a private school. My mother was on the faculty there. I was a star student, my history teacher's favorite student. And we were waiting in line at school at the end of the day. And my mother might have been tied up with stuff in her classroom. I can't remember. And the history teacher was the person who was like putting the kids in the cars that day for pickup time. And he walks up to me and he said, "Is it true that Mr. X is the drunken driver that crashed into your mother's car and killed your little brother?" Okay, so Mr. X was not only a person that I knew, his children went to the school. They were more or less my age. Mr. X lived not that far from us. Mr. X was on the board of directors of the school. Mr. X was in my parents' social circle. I mean, these people were socially connected and professionally connected through the school. Nobody had ever told me who the person was. And as soon as we got in the car to drive home, I just blasted it out. "My history teacher just asked me about this. Is it true? Is this really what happened?" And
oh my God.
So this surfaces all everything that, that is hard for my mother to talk about. She said, "Yes, that's it." And, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how have you gone through these dozen or more years of being constantly confronted with the person responsible for scarring your child for life and the death of your first son? That was okay. So my great aunt, my grandmother, it's like, and my parents, of course, there are people in the family who know all this stuff.
Right.
They know things about me that I don't know about myself.
Right.
But to find out that my history teacher and the teacher's lounge at school, the whole
Conversation. Yeah.
whole community had knowledge about my life history, my family's tragedy that I was not even really privy to. I was completely unprepared. And I understand my parents' choices. I forgive them for their choices. I will not say that I'm damaged by their choices.
Affected for sure, though.
There's been an impact, definitely. That was tough. But again, we didn't really talk it through.
Right.
I didn't feel the need to know more. I felt a little bit more protected. I have a knowledge now. I kind of know what everybody else knows about me now, and I can live with that. So the years go by, and it's just a part of my life story. And so once in a while, if the light catches my head, someone will say, "Oh, where did you get that? What's that scar?"
Yeah.
And I get to say, "Hey, I had my face done when I was, in my single digits. I got my face work done early. I don't have to ever do it again." And I might say, "Yeah, I was in an automobile accident when I was a really little kid," or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know that, and I had seen also, there are photographs of my face after the surgeries that are kept in a drawer that one time rooting around through the bureau where the photographs are, I came across this little collection of photographs of me with my face all scarred. There are family photographs also of me as a toddler standing by the crib with the baby brother in it and looking kind of perplexed, like, who is this?
What the heck is this?
My life is about to change.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one anymore.
Yeah.
So the years go by, and it's just part of me. And then, and this was 2013. I will remember this to my dying day. My husband and I were visiting my parents. My dad was still alive. And we were sitting around in the den, just kind of chatting about stuff. We had dinner and we were drinking. They were drinking. My mom and I were still drinking wine after dinner. And I don't know how it came up, but at some point, the subject was raised about the accident, which is pretty much how we always refer to it, as the accident.
Correct.
And I don't know if it was the mix of alcohol. I think, when we would visit, he'd make it a special occasion and he'd have a little scotch or something, but he began to share. And it just came flowing out. Everything about what happened, being away at the army camp, driving through the night with a relative stranger, not knowing who was dead, who was alive, what had happened, and all of that. That my mother was still a nursing mother.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's kind of when she piped up. She said, yes, and I was still nursing. The whole personal agony of it all
Right.
came pouring out, mostly from him, not as much from her, but she kind of would add in a little bit. And then the thing he said that really struck me after the accident, and I always knew that she was just really, really nervous and overcautious about driving in cars, understandably. But my dad said after the accident, when everyone was okay physically, she needed to go to the grocery store. I need to run an errand or something. And he said, oh, that's okay. I'll do it for you. I'll take care of it. She said, no, I'm going to go. And she scooped me up, took me to the car, put me in the car, got behind the wheel, backed out of the driveway, and went off to do the errand. That was the first time, of course, we'd been in a car since.
Right,
and my dad just said, with just almost crying with tears, he said, that's when I understood the woman that I had married, that her strength in that moment.
Oh, that makes me want to cry.
I know. And I know my mother is a strong person, but just that image of I'm moving on with my life and doing what I have to do. This is probably the hardest thing I'll ever have to do, but I'm going to do it.
Right.
So we had the full reveal, all of that, the sharing of personal experience, the horror, the tragedy. 2 months after that, my father died. Had we not had that conversation that night at that time, and I give thanks to heaven for the fact that we did have that in his lifetime.
Yes.
I was able to hear it firsthand from him. That was really that was just really important. I think at some point it was for him, apparently, because after those many years, he finally felt like you didn't know that his life could be counted in weeks, and none of us did either. Right. So it was, so I had information, and then I realized earlier this year, I found out a way to fill in the rest of the story. Because of research that I do for my 20th century novels and my Golden Age Hollywood novels and everything, I have a subscription to newspapers.com. Right. Why it took me so long to think of this, I have no idea.
Oh, gosh.
But I thought, my parents were prominent people. It's a small city, but an accident like that must have been covered in the newspaper. I went into the search function of the paper and put in the keywords that I knew would
bring it up,
surface whatever it was. And oh my goodness, it had the reports on the accident, description of the accident, description of how it happened, the drivers that ran into my mother's car skidded like 80 feet, that we were admitted to hospital. It also had when I was released from hospital, it had the death notice and funeral notice for my baby brother. It had some follow-up stuff. It had a few months later a notice about a lawsuit. Sort of all this reportage, this was all there. And so I was able to, cobble together the more objective history of what had happened. And then a friend of mine who's more or less my age had told me just within the last couple of years about being at a cocktail party or something. And she must have mentioned that she was a friend of mine. She knew me, or maybe that she was coming to New Hampshire to visit me. And this person, I don't even know who it was, said, oh, that poor family, that accident. This is decades later. Right. Decades later. Right. People still are aware of it. How do you regard a sibling that was your sibling, your flesh and blood, your family, that you didn't really know, except that you knew that your parents loved him dearly. You knew that he was greatly mourned by all the family, that he has a gravestone. And we have driven my mother to that spot over the years. Not a lot of conversation about anything related to it, but it's knowing that you have a sibling. And I have a living brother. I do. Right. I have a brother still.
The two have nothing to do with each other when it comes to I get it. Here he is.
Except part of his life. He has never had any kind of real real curiosity about it as part of his life. I mean, he knows it's part of his family history, but it's so remote, it's remote from him. And
But he clearly wasn't born when it happened. So
no,
it's something that's in his history. Yeah.
They made sure to have him born as soon as they possibly could. And in fact, so my second memory of life on Earth also is a hospital. It was my grandmother driving with me and somebody else to the hospital in her car. And I sat in the car with somebody else. And my grandmother went into the hospital. And then the adult who was with me said, "Look up, Margaret." And I looked up, and there's a big, kind of glass hospital window. And there's my mother holding my new baby brother.
Oh.
And so those two memories are my two first memories of being alive. One was in the hospital when I was having my surgery, and then the other one was going to the hospital and finding what I thought was my first baby brother, but actually wasn't.
Second. Wow. So two things jump out at me when I was listening to you. The first part is just the secrecy of events like this, not only within neighborhoods and communities, but within families. Coach Ludi, who was my track coach at Concord High School forever, he and his wife lost a child to a brain tumor when she was 4. And that preceded their move to New Hampshire. They needed to start fresh. And the moment they got here, Mrs. Ludi got pregnant and had her youngest child, her last child. So Phyllis Ann, the baby, her picture was on the dresser always. And the youngest child, Bobby, never knew who that was. No one talked about the little girl in the picture. So he'd look at this picture and, come up with stories in his mind and who was it? And he was well into his life before he thought to say, who is this little girl? Well, that's Phyllis Ann. Who is Phyllis Ann? Well, she's your sister. So when you talk about, okay, you don't remember them, but now you just have this thing, my sister, he had a very similar questions and wanting to know details. And I came to find this out after Molly died. Coach Ludi was so helpful with me. And that's when he shared the story. And he told the story of her death with so much detail. And it was, 70 years prior, 60 years prior, just the vivid detail, the way that you remember certain things, you just remember. So I was with my child. Gracie was with her sister. So we had all the facts that we could have. Her death wasn't something we found out about later. I was consumed with questions. I can't imagine having this event shared with me and not having any answers, from the family point of view. It speaks to the amount of, I don't know what the word even is, energy in the universe or spiritual connection or love or whatever it is that's invisible and we can't see it, that's attached to people and events. Having lost a child, I know that changed your mother forever. You can't be who you were before. You can do your best, but the only before you had that baby or that daughter or whatever. I listened to Mr. Ludi talk about Marge and how they would cry all night and work all day. That was them as parents. And so here you are, this little girl, thinking you have a nice, happy life and you have your little brother and you don't know anything different because this is what you've lived. And then this huge piece of information comes. That it's mind-boggling to me. Not that it happened, just that the strength of it and the intensity of it is just the same now, and that it follows you.
Yes, and the way kids' minds work, especially if you've got an imagination and make up stories and everything. And so I would talk to him when I was little and think about him in bed at night and wonder if he would have been, what he would have looked like. Would he have looked like my other brother? Would he have looked more like me? I don't look that much like my brother. Those kinds of things, of course, are powerful. The other thing is, especially after the incident with the history teacher.
Yeah.
At that moment, and I think I was probably about 14, at that moment I knew I will never live in this town again. As soon as I'm old enough to leave, I will go. And in fact, I didn't even graduate from high school. I dropped out of high school and went straight to college at 17 to get away. I mean, that was, and I never expressed actually until that conversation with my dad and my parents before my dad died. I never expressed the reason that it's I'm going to get out of here as soon as I possibly can. I'm going to make good grades. I'm going to get ready for college and I'm going to go to college the minute that I can get a college to accept me. And I'm out of here and I will never live here again. And I never did. And I never will. But because I knew that it was all out there and there were things, it's just really weird to have people tell you stuff about yourself and your family and your life that you don't know and not to know at what point that's going to come pinging back at you.
Yes. Well, and to me too, it's incredibly unsettling. You're walking around, you've had conversations. Your parents had every opportunity to fill you in on all of those details. I had
And they
obvious
did
reasons for
just
not.
enough. There was
Yes,
there was
always
a
just,
certain
yeah,
point beyond which
yeah,
they weren't naming names. They
yeah,
weren't giving
right,
the gory details
yeah,
of hospitals and
yeah,
lawsuits and any of that kind of stuff.
right, right. Yeah, but I know that when I found, and this is not quite different, but this was a chapter in my book, which I was 10 when it happened, and I remember it. I could cry about it today when my friend Maura
Oh,
died. And my
yeah.
mother worked at the hospital, so of course she couldn't share anything, but she knew
Mhm.
for months
Oh, yeah.
that more I was angry. I was angry for a long time. Like I understood the logic of it, as I'm sure now as an adult you do too,
Of
but
course.
when you're the high school girl hearing this, when you're the 10-year-old reading it in the paper along with everyone else in the world, just the indignation and anger that I felt at my mother, that took me a long time to sort of, it was like my first big I can't trust my mother event.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as an adult I get it. And life is just so different now. When I was coaching at Bow, the year that Molly died, a mother of one of my runners shared when her sister died, and they were just 2 years apart, like Gracie and Molly. And her sister died. She talked about how she had a sister and then she didn't. And that life just stopped. The neighbors looked away and she just didn't know what to make of it and how to wrap her head around it. And she ended up having other siblings. But in her telling me the story 40 years later, same thing, every detail and all the nuances of, when she was the sibling and she just remembered having questions and being given answers and then finding out more, that same thing, this lifetime of finding out.
Hmm.
Both of us from those types of experiences, like I probably say too much most of the time and share things about myself that maybe I shouldn't. But I have such a hard time with secrecy because I find it to be so unsettling. It's almost like carbon monoxide to me, like a secret. You can't see it, but you know something's not right or something's off. And I think for a child, that's got to be incredibly unsettling. So the teacher piece, plus that's at school, that's your
Oh,
social life. And
so the teacher piece, that part of it, and I've never been angry at my parents. I've been at times frustrated, like I
yeah,
really want to know more, but I don't feel I can ask. Or if I do ask, then, I'm going to upset them. And I
yeah,
mean, it's just agony for them to their dying day.
yeah,
But the teacher thing, learning who it was, and I actually could appreciate. My mother might even have articulated it. I can't remember. I could appreciate them not naming a name, knowing that I was growing up with these children,
yes,
that
right. So how
this
would you deal with
these,
that?
these
Yes,
adults were, part of my life. They weren't directly part of my life. Their kids were close to my life. I didn't know them well, but we
right.
certainly knew them. I knew them. We passed in the halls and I knew their names and which one was my age or a little older or younger. And that was a protective thing
Yes,
or a thing that I think was important. They wanted me to live my life objectively
yes,
without carrying the baggage of,
right.
your dad killed my baby brother,
Yeah,
that kind
right,
of stuff.
right. Oh, yeah, that's a very good point.
Eventually, and I was never mad that I didn't know. I could understand why,
Yeah,
but I couldn't understand. And my mother was furious, and I'm sure my father was too. I didn't witness his reaction about the history teacher doing that. I mean, that was just,
yeah. What was in his brain to say such a thing to you?
I don't know. I mean, he was
Maybe
a
he had it
weird
out
guy.
for that guy. Maybe there was something to do with Mr. X. Like
I don't know.
yeah,
And Mr. X, for all the horribleness and to his credit, cleaned up his act, upstanding, righteous, church going,
yes, yes,
on the board at a church affiliated school, all the kind of stuff.
right,
So, life is messy and
yes,
relationships and people are messy
yes,
and people can be redeemed. This is also a story or an example of that in a way. No, I don't know a lot about his redemption story. I just
right,
know what I know about that family as
right.
well. But
Well, and they had to live in that community. I
well,
mean, it was a big
yes, that's
newspaper story. So he
of
has to get up and
course.
go to work every day, and those kids have to go to school
Uh,
every day. So yeah, in some ways, I think your mom did. She sheltered you from tension and stress and judgment that you didn't need to be a part of.
But I wasn't protected from great aunt telling me this or
No,
grandmother being the one to give me the details or history teacher
yeah.
or
Yeah, you found
or
everything else out. You found
looking
everything
it
out
up
from other
on the
people.
newspaper
Yeah.
website.
Yeah. Yeah.
So but I am very protective of my parents,
Yeah.
my living parent and my deceased parent, and They were wonderful, devoted parents.
Yes.
Everyone should be blessed with parents like that and a family, a nurturing family like mine. Life's not perfect and people aren't perfect, and they did the best they could.
Right.
And I did the best I could to deal with it.
Yeah.
It made me stronger, I suppose, or I'm sure it's made me independent in a lot of ways. Like, I can get out of this place.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, exactly. Well, you have a storyteller's brain too. And I knew this. I have an appreciation for authors after working on with Virginia in the process of taking a story that I dictate into a phone that she listens to while she walks and then transcribes into a computer, then reads out loud to you, perhaps, like how a story, but it's a type of a brain to organize an event into a story. And I wonder sometimes if that was helpful for you, not even consciously helpful, but your questions and pondering. You can't be an author if you can't look at one thing 50 different ways, because you have to represent every character in your book. So, so if you're writing about a really rigid Hispanic man married to a very loud, woman from Israel, you have to understand the Hispanic man and the Israeli woman equally to make them believable in your book. At least I would think so.
Yeah.
So I think about little you, 5-year-old you, 6-year-old you, 9-year-old you, 14-year-old you. The way that you share the story is I can picture it. I'm just speculating here. We all just cope in different ways. I know I pull on certain strengths that I have to deal with Molly's loss, and you just have. It's this beautiful, sad, tragic story that lives inside your heart. When you share it, it comes off that way. It's not a list of events. It's not. Yeah, I don't know. Wow, I never.
Well,
it's about people every day.
There are so many, there are different phases. There's like the 5-year-old, and then the hearing about it later, and then the learning, and then remembering, well, why do I remember being in the hospital? What was that? Oh, there was a connection there. It's sort of, so filling in those puzzle pieces for myself a lot of the time, as well as, seeking another puzzle piece from somebody else. It is a story. I see it as a story, and it has a beginning and a through line and an arc. It's not over. As long as my mom's alive, I always and still have the opportunity to continue conversations if I so choose. I have chosen not to. She has sent me, digitized photos that she had previewed before she sent them to me, of me standing next to the cradle with baby, so she has her way of sharing my story visually, and there are pictures of me after the surgery. That Christmas, there's clearly I'm standing by a Christmas tree, there's like a scar on my face and all of that. So there are actually visuals that accompany this story as well, and that I can look at and ponder and realize that at the time I didn't know anything of what I know now.
So that brings me to another observation. So when I look at, first of all, the loss of the child is part of it. For me, my experience, the hardest part in losing Molly is all the other realities that I lost when she died, like all the assumptions I had, all the plans I had. People say, well, don't you get happy when you look at her pictures? And I'm like, well, yeah, okay, yes, of course I get happy when I look at her pictures, except when I look at a picture, I go back to when I took the picture or when the picture was taken. And I remember my reality then and what I was thinking and what my thoughts and plans about her future were. And I become gutted because it's just a stark reminder that everything I thought on that day was never going to happen. Like on that day, I assumed she'd be 22 years old right now, and she's not. On that day, I didn't know she had only one more month of June left in her life on the day that picture was taken. When you remark about looking at a picture that you didn't remember existed, here's a picture of you with this infant brother. And when that picture was taken, your mother's thoughts were, these are my children. They will grow up together, and then I look at Jack and I look at your living brother, and these are human beings that may not exist had we not lost the other. How do you reconcile that?
Can't.
No, you have to, they almost have to stay separate, quite honestly. Because if you put them together, now you're comparing two things. It's like an apple and an orange, really. They're not comparable. But your story just illustrates to me, and where it comforts me a little bit, is that all of this emotion and all of this grief and all of this change and all of this process occurred from the loss of a human that had only really existed in the reality of your family for 2 months, that you didn't even remember. So for you, almost didn't exist at all. And this story still makes my tummy nervous. All these years later, it still has that power. And that's a comfort to me because there are times I feel that I shouldn't be as upset as I still am, that I shouldn't struggle with certain things like I still do, or I should forgive this doctor by now. And, I just, and those things all happen the way they happen. And my steps are mine. Your parents' steps are theirs. I've learned that as well. There's another little girl that died right when Molly died of a brain tumor. Her name is never mentioned. Her family closed quarters. That was what they did. And that's how they dealt with it. And this girl, younger brother, just graduated high school, and I had not made the connection that he was his younger brother. So I talked about what was that like. A lot of his process in dealing with his sister's death was going to Molly B events. And he got it. He understood his mother they couldn't do it. But we just had this unbelievable talk, and he's big into theater. And what he likes the most about theater is he gets to feel differently about different things depending on who his character is.
Well, and I think, I was on the stage in grown-up theater from the age of 10 all the way through graduate school. I think both that as well as always sort of writing and thinking, I think those things were helpful. A lot of times I didn't want to be myself. It helped to be able to inhabit a character, to make up a character biography, and eventually to write about characters and sort of work through my own uncertainties or questions or issues, sort of in a fictional way. And secrets, secrets are great conflicts in fiction as well as in life. And so I've certainly had a lot of experience with that. But, you're speaking about the pictures of Molly and seeing and imagining what had happened. I know the date of my brother's birthday, and I always wonder, what is my mother thinking today, knowing. So last week was an anniversary of the accident.
Yeah.
Yesterday was an anniversary of the day that I was finally released from the hospital. And I know those things because of the newspapers.
Right.
I'm thinking about those things, and I'm aware of them and honoring them and remembering, and knowing that probably my mother, many, many states away from here, is having completely different memories and thoughts about it. But just sort of, feeling kind of a connection and yet not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. As the mother version in my story, I also contemplate and remember, the month of March is tricky for me because I feel like I'm marching into
what's coming.
Yes. And so the month of July for your mother, I'm sure early on, especially, but as you get into the days leading up to the accident, why did I decide to get in the car then? What if I had just waited around and around and around? I still, on my tricky days, apologize to Molly for making this decision or that decision. I can't help it. The feelings come up, which I think is all just part of the process. So you're right. I'm sure your mom on some level never forgets what the date is.
I can tell you that as soon that growing up as young children, we never got into my parents' car or any other car without a seatbelt or a child restraint of some. They immediately, they didn't have the kind of things that they have nowadays, but there were like harnesses and things that you could strap your kid in, even way back decades ago. And I have never gotten into a car where I didn't put on a seatbelt in my life. And I've never gotten behind the wheel of a car after having imbibed any form of alcohol. I mean, we just have these no-go places that are completely ingrained in us because of our family history.
Yes.
Which is, it's a good thing. I'm a great promoter of seatbelt usage and not driving impaired. But to me, it's just on beyond practical safety consideration. It's like my life changed because these things weren't done.
Put in place. Yes, exactly. And it's not the list of things that could happen. It's the emotion behind the action of putting them in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, Margaret, what a profoundly beautiful, horrible story.
Well, but everybody's story of loss is profoundly beautiful and horrible in some way.
Yeah.
I suspect mine is just somewhat different just because of all the components.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to describe a sense of loss for somebody that you never knew.
Right.
It's hard to explain, but it's a fact. It's true.
Yeah. There's a Welsh word, hiereth. I
Yes.
actually wrote a book. I wrote a blog post about it.
The longing for the thing you never knew kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes to mind. Yeah, that's a teary-eyed word for me sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad you shared this story, Margaret. I'll tell you what, in the child loss reality, you have late-term miscarriages, you have stillbirths, you have sudden infant death syndrome, and you have illnesses or accidents as babies. So that's all sort of one manner of child loss.
Mm.
And I often think, like, when your dad was sort of hoping, not hoping, but well, yes, except I
Yes.
get it. I remember when Molly first died, I thought, oh gosh, this would have been much easier, I think, if it were Gracie, because I think Molly would handle it better. Didn't mean I wanted
Right.
Molly gone. It just, I mean, Gracie gone. It just meant I thought, oh God, if this had to happen, why is it this way? And Gracie's been amazing. I do know that the feelings that parents have over an infant is much more that instinctive, protective mama bear kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I lost a baby at 25 weeks and I didn't have time to bond with that baby, but I had all those physical feelings and then my milk came in, but there was no baby to nurse and your mom's still nursing and I imagine
Well,
there were
Barb, that's a whole other conversation because, when I've had miscarriage, it was at such an early stage. It's like within 12 hours of realizing I'm pregnant, I'm losing a baby I didn't know I had and didn't know if I had never expected to have due to infertility. So
yes.
that's another,
Yes.
in a way, it kind of relates. It's kind of like the loss of
Something
something
you
you
never knew.
didn't know,
Right.
never expected, the complete unknown, and
Right.
yet it still registers as a loss for
Yeah, oh,
sure.
very much so, very much so.
Yeah.
And just the back and forth. Your poor dad with a night long ride to contemplate the unknown in the worst way.
That
God bless
just
him.
that just slayed me when, hearing him describe that. And I
Yes.
also, it was illuminating to me. It's like, I understand why he has never wanted to talk about this.
Right.
I understand how because the way he was telling it, he was in tears. I mean, this
Yeah.
was decades later.
Yeah.
And we know that grief and loss do not fade with decades, with
No.
time. They just don't. You might react differently to them in a different place and time
Yeah.
than you maybe did at another time and then in the time in the future. But for him, he was reliving the worst night of his life.
Right.
And
Right.
that was very apparent. And I felt so grateful to him for sharing it,
No kidding. I'll bet.
that he felt that it was important for me to hear, and which it
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
It definitely was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and
his,
no one talked about these things back then, but men especially. And if you were a military man, you buck up. You'd be strong, and
of course.
there's no emoting or crying about these things. Yeah, boy, boy, oh boy, so many levels. Grief is like an
Well,
onion,
thanks for letting me share about this.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not something that I talk about often, and certainly never
No,
before in any kind of
no,
public forum. People who know me or know me well,
right.
uh, it's something that I can talk about, but I think it hits differently with different people.
Well,
And
it depends on your experience coming in. I do know because I have a huge following of listeners that have lost a child. So the family dynamic of child loss, everyone's affected. And I have a bit of not an obsession, but if I am to write another book, it will be around sibling loss because there isn't a lot out there about it. And my thoughts were to put together each chapter is a different sibling's story
mhm.
because that's really, especially when there's now grown-up siblings or you're a family of five and now you're a family of two. And what do? There are so few resources for these kids and more all the time. There are some amazing nonprofits in New Hampshire. Gracie went to this thing, a camp called Camp Erin, which was all about siblings or children who had suffered loss. So
Mhm.
parent loss, sibling,
Mhm.
hugely helpful. But losing a sibling, I don't know. There's no word for it. There's no descriptor for it. Oh, you're somebody with a dead sibling. That's what I am.
Yeah.
And I know for Gracie, it's hard for her to get around sometimes. There are times she feels very strongly like, I don't want to be the girl with a dead sister. And then she's like, oh my God, I told Molly I didn't want to be her sister. Like, well, no, that's not what you said at all. You said you didn't want her to be dead, but all those conflicting emotions, like with your dad's story, that's all the time. And my story is nothing like yours. And there were 5 or 6 things that made me, you know, my throat catch. So,
Well, I
yeah.
know my father's side of the story, regardless of the fact that they lost someone at 8 weeks, whereas you lost a young teenager.
Yeah.
That it's still the same profound loss.
Yes.
Age is
Yes. Oh,
somewhat
yes. Yeah.
irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. One last question, just to sort of wrap us up a little bit. Have you
Sure.
ever considered creating a fictional story about a family with a loss like this, or is it too close to home?
Yes, I have, but I think it would be hard for me to, I mean, yes and no. I don't know how I would approach it. And I
Right.
think it would be for people, all the people out there in my mother's local community and all of that. it's generational. If those people weren't still around, it would be a lot easier.
That was my first thought, actually.
Because it would
Primarily
be
your mom.
so transparently what had happened. And the children of Mr. X are my generation. There's just so much attached to it.
Yes.
And I don't think I carry it so close, and I'm not sure, despite speaking to you today, sharing it in that form, I think would be no. I mean, there aspects of it might come in and out of a book.
Well, and I imagine
but
your
not that
emotions.
whole story.
Your emotions must. I'm quite sure your life experiences formulate the personalities of some of your characters. So it's not like, where you come from is always going to be affected on some level by this experience. So I'm sure it plays a part in your writing anyway. It's hard. Sometimes as a podcaster, I have to be careful when I'm telling my story that I don't tell someone else's story or my version of someone else's story. Mm-hmm. So lots of my episodes that share profound things, I make up names or I change enough of the details, nothing from the truth of the story, but enough of the details that if somebody might be trying to guess who I'm talking about, they would have a much harder time. And I think that's part of it. Yes, this is your beautiful, beautiful story, but it involves people that have their own stories connected to it. And that's where the stories can get tricky and equally beautiful. But well, listen, I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate it so much. We don't always have to talk about everything in life, but I just do feel that healthy conversation, which then gives time to ponder, is such a healthy piece of moving along, and my family lives well into their late 90s and early 100s. So I've got almost 4 decades left, I'm sure, to have to ponder Molly's loss. I try not to carry around too much. It gets exhausting sometimes. So these experiences help.
Well, it's helpful in a sense to talk to you about it, knowing I was going to be talking to you about it, to organize the thoughts in my head, which, are pretty organized. And yet, to be able to talk about it without breaking down and crying, which I could easily do. And in some moods I would have done, but, to sort of look at it both objectively and emotionally it's a bit of a dance, but it's possible. And I think it's helpful for me. And I thought really hard about, do I want to do this? Should I do this? Yeah. Why do I feel like I need to do this? And that's when I stopped asking myself a question. It's like, well, I feel like I need to do this.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do it.
I'm going to do it. It's an opportunity. And if it's helpful to you, and if maybe other people who I'll never know or see, then that's glad. And it's always great to talk to you, Barb.
Yeah, same. I know. We live so close, and we say we'll have tea, and then we never do. But
I know
that's life sometimes. On a note, aside from our heart-wrenching stories of loss, are you working on a novel now?
Yes, I'm getting back into historical fiction after writing 2 contemporary books. But actually, the most recent contemporary book that I wrote, Sequins and Starlight, which came out in the spring, deals with loss, but it's the later aftermath of loss, where the two people that come together, and it's ultimately a romance, but the two people that come together, one has lost a spouse, one has lost a sibling and has another sibling who has issues and is institutionalized. We've moved kind of about a decade past the initial loss, and then how you're still
affected by
how it still affects you and your choices previously, and then how is it going to affect your choices yet to come?
Yes.
And to build relationships and have the kind of understanding and empathy of different kinds of loss. But within that time of the timeline, 10, a solid decade later, where are people and how are they feeling? And it, as we all know, is different all the time.
Yes, exactly. Oh,
there's no constant. It's not static. It's just it's kind of always up and down, but yet always being hopeful and optimistic and forward thinking while still holding on to the important pieces of the past.
Right. Do you have a website?
MargaretPorter.com. The website has links to my Instagram and my
perfect. Wonderful.
TikTok and my Facebook and my
and all these ridiculous things.
All the
we're
things
supposed to do.
All the little icons and stuff.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that that's in the show notes. I need to reiterate to all of you out there how honored I am to have heard the story and to have it shared here. These stories, as profound as they are, can be tricky to let out of your mouth. So thank you, Margaret, for being willing to talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barb.
So be good to yourself, everybody. Be good to yourself. And when you've been good to yourself, be good to someone else. And after that, have a good day, everybody.
Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.